As I tried to think for a few moments, I reminded myself of a thought that we shared last year in this room. It was a thought that I often have in camp when Tisha B'Av begins. It's of the roller coaster of emotions, how we go from fun, from sports and trips, and then obviously we have the 9 days, obviously we have the various halachas. But then almost as we flip a switch, we walk into Tisha B'Av. And last year, I shared a short personal story that I witnessed. And as I thought of that story tonight, I realized that that story didn't end, unfortunately, last year. And it continued this past year. So I'll retell part one, and I'll continue with part two. And with that, hopefully, we'll be able to open ourselves up to another Tisha B'Av. The beauty of sitting on the floor with the lights out is that we're each in our own little world. We just went from the Sudam Mafsekas, time that we purposely don't sit together. We're each in our own little place, a place that we could close our eyes, and whether it's during Eicha, during Kinnis, perhaps during the Kumzitz, we could allow our neshama to open up. And we could allow ourselves to become a little bit more real, to be a bit more mature, to connect to a place inside of us that maybe we didn't even know exists. And that is a liberating feeling. It's a feeling of connection. And that's really what Tisha B'Av is all about. Just to remember the tzarais, someone just told me an hour ago, is not really the whole point. We could tell stories, we could watch films, we maybe even could cry. But if we don't realize the purpose of it all, if we don't realize that what we're trying to do is figure out a way for Hashem to, yes, have a home again, to realize how we need not just Hashem to be in his home, we need to be those living in that home, which only could come when we have a connection to Hashem. So on Tisha B'Av, when we sit and when our heart opens up a little bit, that's the connection. That feeling of realness, that feeling is that feeling as our neshama connects back to its creator, as we realize that life has a purpose, that yes, there's fun, there's games, but there's something greater than it all, that we're supposed to be on this world for a purpose, that we're trying to connect to Hashem on a deeper level, on a greater level, becoming bigger, greater people, allowing our inner greatness to shine forth. So last year I shared that I was sitting at a bris, a simcha, a happy time. And I'm sitting at the Suda, and an elderly Rav said, Shalom Aleichem, I just moved into Muncie. And as I was talking to him, someone came over. And someone said, should we yes go? But it's only the first day of Shiva. And the Rav said, no, for sure you should go. And another person came over and says, Rav, is it appropriate? What should we do? And after the third person came over, I turned and I said, is the Rav talking about so-and-so? A young couple that tragically lost a child. He said, yes. Why? You know him? I said, yeah. I lived in Eretz Yisrael. Our children went to Gan together. We friends mutually. He said, oh, he's sitting Shiva down the block. And I didn't even have to ask. And he said, yes, you should go. And walking out of the bris and into the Shiva house is a bit how I feel as we walk into Tisha B'Av. From a simcha, from happiness, from everything great. We live in a world, in a bubble called camp. Outside this world, yes, there's Eretz Yisrael and there's politics and there's war and there's hatred. But we live here in our own insular world, and sometimes we could almost forget that it's not real, that the games that we play are all fabricated. We make them up. And then we walk from that world of joy, of perfection, of bliss, of amazingness into the Shiva house. And walking into that house, I said when I left, was possibly the most difficult thing I ever did. But unfortunately, this past winter, towards the end of winter, I come home from Kollel. It was about 6:30, and someone calls me. I picked up, and he says, "Did you hear about so and so?" Now, the line usually has one or two endings. Either it's a simcha, there's an engagement, there's a birth, or, and I said, no. What? And he said, the Rav didn't hear? I said, what happened? He said, he didn't want to say. I said, what do you mean? Last year he lost a child. Last year. He said, yeah, I don't know, but the Levaya is in a half hour. I said, what? Are you sure? It, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. I said, you're sure? He said, I don't know. I got a message. I live down the block from him. And the kavura is in a half hour. Again, the world went from normal, from a regular day, from walking home to put my kids to sleep, to driving to a kavura, a father younger than myself, burying a second child, a young baby just disappeared. Hashem called his number. And when I subsequently played the Shiva call, there was, of course, nothing to say. There's nothing ever to say. But a young baby, a young couple sitting Shiva for the second time, and I didn't want to go. No one wants to go. You have to go. So I went, I'm sitting there, and I got there towards the end of the day as this couple was trying to put their one remaining child to sleep. And she's sitting there and she's kvetching, and me and another Rav are sitting there, and we said, like, should we leave? No, it's okay. It's okay. So we just sat there. And the father goes to put the daughter to sleep, and the wife shares that after the patira of their other child, this girl who's 5, 6 years old would constantly ask, Mommy, is Hashem going to take away the younger brother? Mommy, Daddy, is he going to be healthy? And the parents and the mother said to this other Rav and myself, you can never promise. But without promising, we told our daughter, of course the child's going to be okay. What's the question? Of course. And she said, as she lost herself, she says, what am I supposed to tell her now? Hashem indeed took away another child. And she continues and says, of course, we believe that Hashem runs the world and there's some sort of purpose here. But what are we supposed to tell this little kid? Luckily, there was another Rav there, and he said something to me. It was a blur. After hearing that, I shut down. I was finished. I have no clue what happened at the rest of the Shiva. Sat there for another 20 minutes. I gave the husband, the father, a heroic hug, and I left. And an elderly Rav shared that when someone goes through tsaris, Mendel Kaplan explained, more than normal, he's not suffering for himself. He's suffering for Klal Yisrael. Unfortunately, this isn't an isolated story. This is a real story, but this is Klal Yisrael. We go back to the year that we just had. We go back to the past few years, and almost every year, anyone who takes notes on Tisha B'Av probably has words over the past few years, unprecedented. There was the COVID. There was now Eretz Yisrael. And each year we believe and we trust that yes, the tsaris have to end. We have a loving father, and he's not going to call another one of his children. And there's Meiron, and to hear a father get up at Meiron and say, I have no doubts on Hashem. He picked my young son as a flower next to his Kisei HaKavod. To watch a father have the Gevura to say that. And we wonder, Hashem, when's it going to end? When? Enough. Enough. It's beyond. And as I thought that we're going to have to walk into Tisha B'Av, it hit me that last year I thought that this young couple suffered the most. And when the same young couple has to bury another child, sit another Shiva, I have no clue how they go on. And what's pathetically painful it was about a year in between. And for that year, anytime I meet a friend who knew this father who sat Shiva, I would say, how's Naftali doing? No, really, how's he doing? He says, he's doing okay. I say, how's he doing okay? How's he doing okay? How's he functioning? How's his wife functioning? How's it possible? And now, to lose another child, that is the story of Klal Yisrael. And there's only one answer. We could question, and we could point fingers, and we could try to make up excuses. And after Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, when we all heard about the realness of life and how the situation hasn't ended in Eretz Yisrael, there's one line, and that's, this is what Golus is. Golus is tsares. Golus is pain. Golus is death. Golus is going from a seemingly perfect day to a levaya. Golus is getting a call after Shacharis one morning, or actually it was a message that said, I went last night to the ICU with my 2-year-old. He was having seizures. He's in critical condition. And I read the message and I thought to myself, what do I do now? I respond. I call him. What do I do? A young father, son's in critical condition. I spent Shabbos with the kid and the father. I was thinking, what do you mean? He was in shul. I saw him walking home from shul. So I got into the car and I drove to the ICU, and a baby sitting there with more machines and probes coming out of this child than are existent, just lying there in a coma. Well, this is Gullus. This is life without a Beis HaMikdash. So without getting all grand, and why do we need a Beis HaMikdash? And what does it mean to us? And what is it going to mean, the Yemaisa Mashiach? Let's be very, very practical. And let's realize that every single one in our own lives knows someone personal, someone not so personal, has heard stories of tsaris, of tragedies. And these things only happen because we are in Gullus. The Shechina is not in its home, and we are living a life devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we walk into Tisha B'Av, we have a 24, 25-hour window. And the window of mourning is a window to connect, to realize we need Hashem to be back in his home. We need to be living our lives with Hashem. Hashem will only be living back in his home if there are people in that home that relate to him. But if all of us have no clue what it means, a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we don't know what it means to make a bracha, if we don't know what it means a tefillah, if we don't understand what it means to be nice to someone, if we don't know what it means, then Hashem's house is almost pointless. It'll be beautiful, it'll be grand, but we'll be foreigners there. So when we walk into Tisha B'Av and we think of all the tzaris, and I'm sure we're going to hear stories, and we'll watch film, and hopefully there'll be something that will shake us. We just saw at the cantata, watching that white sheep be pulled over, listening to the beeping and beeping and beeping, and then just going still. Just that beeping, as we all know, is just death. If that doesn't send a shiver to your spine, but what do we have to take from that shiver? What's the purpose? We're trying to find a place in our life to connect back to Hashem. And hopefully, over the next 24 hours, if we allow our neshama to open a little bit, if we go into our own little Dalit Amos, don't worry about the guy to your right, don't worry about the guy to your left. When the lights are off and you hear something that you connect to, and you close your eyes and maybe you feel a little bit of emotion and you feel a little bit of sadness and you realize this is what it means not to have a Beis HaMikdash. This is what it means to live a life devoid of Hashem. At that moment, your neshama is talking. And at that moment, you have the power to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, because that is true Avelos. Kol ha'misavel al Yerushalayim. Anyone who mourns Yerushalayim, zeicha v'rayv simchasai. What does that mean? It means to mourn, to realize what we're lacking, and to connect to it, and to become bigger people. So b'siyata d'shmaya, as we begin Ma'ariv into Eicha, into Kumzitz, into Shachris, into Kinnis, into other inspirational films. Don't just pass the day. We will all, in 24 hours, be back in this room davening Ma'ariv. We're going to daven. We'll eat. We'll do Kiddush Levana. Hopefully, Halavai will be in Yerushalayim. But if not, we'll all be eating that roll when the fast ends. But some of us will be completely different people. Some of us will have allowed our neshamas to speak and will have truly connected to the Avilos. And then we will be those people that are Zeicha V'Roya B'Simchasai, that when the Mashiach comes, we'll be realizing that we were the ones, because we brought Hashem into our lives. Emir Hashem, we should all be Zeicha.